The shuttle wasn't supposed to crash. But space doesn't care about what's supposed to happen. One moment, 11-year-old Riley Hayes was strapped in her seat, watching her parents work the controls. The next moment, everything was fire and screaming metal. The emergency systems kicked in too late. When Riley opened her eyes, she was hanging upside down in her safety harness, ears ringing, tasting blood. She called out for her mom. No answer. She called for her dad. Nothing but the crackle of flames and the hiss of leaking fuel. Riley managed to free herself from the harness and dropped hard onto what used to be the ceiling. Every part of her hurt, but she could move. She crawled through twisted metal toward the front of the shuttle. That's when she saw them. Her parents hadn't survived the impact. Riley sat there for a long time, too shocked to cry, too scared to move. Eventually, the growing heat from the fires forced her out through a torn section of hull. She stumbled into alien wilderness, turned back to look at the wreckage, and realized she was completely alone on a planet that wanted her dead. Draka 7 was listed in every galactic database with the same warning: extreme hazard, no settlements, avoid at all costs. Now Riley understood why. The forest around her looked wrong. The trees had leaves that curved like claws. The grass seemed to lean toward her, tracking her movement. Even the air tasted hostile, thick and metallic. In the distance, something roared, and Riley ran back to hide in the broken shuttle. She stayed there for 3 days, rationing the emergency supplies she could find. Protein bars that tasted like cardboard. Water that was running out fast. On the 4th morning, she knew she had to venture out farther to find more water or she'd die of thirst. The emergency beacon was transmitting, but rescue could take weeks on a planet this remote. Riley had to survive until then. She followed what looked like a game trail, her dad's survival knife clutched in her shaking hand. The forest was too quiet, like everything was holding its breath. Then she heard it. A sound that made her freeze in her tracks. It wasn't a hunting cry or a territorial roar. It was a sound of pure, desperate agony. Something was suffering badly. Riley knew she should run the other direction. But her mom had been a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life. She taught Riley that understanding came from curiosity, not fear. And that sound, whatever was making it, was hurting in a way that made Riley's chest ache. She moved toward it carefully, using the thick trees for cover. The canyon opened up suddenly, and Riley had to grab a tree trunk to keep from falling over the edge. Down below, maybe 30 feet down on the rocky floor, was a creature from nightmares. It was massive, easily 20 feet long from nose to tail. Its scales were so black they seemed to absorb light. 6 limbs, each ending in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. Its head was all angles and teeth, massive jaws that could swallow Riley whole without even chewing. A Valrax. Riley had seen pictures in her mom's research files. They were apex predators, the kind of creature that made entire species abandon planets. The kind of monster that appeared in horror stories told across the galaxy. Nothing hunted a Valrax. They were the thing that hunted everything else. But this Valrax wasn't hunting. It was dying. The creature thrashed on the canyon floor, smashing its head against rocks, clawing at its own face with those terrible claws. Its golden eyes were wild with pain and madness. Riley watched in horrified fascination as it roared again, that sound of pure suffering that had drawn her here. Then she saw the problem. Sticking out of the creature's nostril was a thorn. Except calling it a thorn was like calling a knife a splinter. The thing was massive, thick as Riley's arm and at least a foot long, barbed all along its length. It came from a razorwood tree, one of the planet's many hostile plants. Somehow, the Valrax must have gotten too close and the thorn had shot out, embedding itself deep in the most sensitive part of the creature's face. The Valrax couldn't pull it out with its claws without tearing its own face apart. It couldn't grip it with its mouth. It couldn't do anything except slowly go mad from the pain. Riley could see infection spreading around the wound, dark veins running under the scales. The creature was suffering, had probably been suffering for days or weeks, and there was nothing it could do about it. Riley should have left. Every survival instinct in her body screamed at her to back away slowly and never look back. This was the most dangerous predator on a planet full of dangerous things. It could kill her without even trying hard. But Riley looked at those golden eyes, saw the intelligence and desperation in them, and made a decision that would change everything. She started climbing down into the canyon. The rocks were loose and she slipped twice, scraping her hands bloody. The Valrax's head snapped toward her immediately, tracking every movement. Those golden eyes locked onto her, and Riley felt like she was being measured for a meal. The creature's lips pulled back, showing rows of teeth designed to tear through anything. Riley kept her hands up and visible. She moved slowly, so slowly. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. 20 feet away. 15. 10. The Valrax could close that distance in half a second. One pounce and Riley would be gone. She kept talking, using the same soft voice her mom had used with frightened animals. Riley stopped talking and just stood there, 5 feet from a creature that could end her life with one swipe. The Valrax stared at her with those impossibly bright golden eyes. She could see its whole body trembling, every muscle coiled tight. It was deciding. Kill this tiny thing that dared approach, or trust something that defied all its instincts. The seconds stretched out forever. Riley kept her breathing steady, hands still raised where the creature could see them. She was close enough now to smell it, a scent like hot metal and something wild she couldn't name. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off its massive body. Close enough to see her own reflection in those eyes. Then, slowly, the Valrax lowered its head. Not in submission, but in something like permission. Its nostrils flared, and Riley saw the Thorn clearly now. The barbed spine had pushed in deep, surrounded by swollen, infected flesh. Dark blood crusted around the entry point. Just looking at it made Riley's own nose ache in sympathy. She reached out with one shaking hand. The Valrax flinched but held still. Riley wrapped both hands around the Thorn, feeling the rough texture of the bark-like surface. The creature's breathing quickened. She could feel its whole body tensing up again. On 3, Riley whispered, though she didn't know if the creature understood. 1, 2, 3. She pulled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed. Her feet slipped on the rocky ground. The Thorn barely moved. The Valrax let out a sound that was half roar, half whimper, but it didn't pull away. Riley reset her grip, planted her feet better, and tried again. This time she felt it shift. Just a little, but it moved. The third pull did it. The Thorn came free in a rush of dark blood and fluid. Riley fell backward, landing hard on her back, still clutching the massive spine. The Valrax threw its head back and roared, a sound so loud that rocks tumbled down the canyon walls. Riley scrambled backward, certain she'd just made a fatal mistake. Maybe the pain of removal was worse than the pain of the Thorn. Maybe now the creature would see her as a threat. But the Valrax didn't attack. It collapsed onto the canyon floor, sides heaving, breathing in great gasping gulps. Riley sat there clutching the bloody Thorn, watching the creature that should have killed her simply breathe. After weeks of agony, the pain was finally gone. She could see the exact moment the creature realized it. The tension flowed out of its body. Its breathing slowed. Those golden eyes opened again and fixed on Riley with a look she couldn't quite read. The Valrax pushed itself up slowly, favoring its head where the wound was still bleeding. It moved toward Riley, each step deliberate. She wanted to run. Her legs wouldn't move. The creature stopped right in front of her, so close she could have reached out and touched its scarred snout. Then it did something Riley would have sworn was impossible. It lowered its massive head and gently pressed its nose against her hand. Just for a moment. A gesture so careful, so deliberate, that Riley felt tears start to fall. The creature turned and walked toward a shaded area of the canyon. It looked back at Riley once, then settled down on the cool rocks. After a moment, Riley stood up on shaky legs and followed. She didn't know what else to do. She sat down against the canyon wall, keeping some distance but not running away. The Valrax watched her with one eye, then closed both and seemed to fall into the first peaceful sleep it had probably had in weeks. Riley must have dozed off too, because when she woke, the canyon was darker and something was nudging her shoulder. She jerked awake to find the Valrax right next to her, holding something in its jaws. It dropped the thing carefully at her feet. A fruit of some kind, purple and smooth. Riley stared at it, then at the creature. Was this food? Was it safe? The Valrax nudged the fruit closer with its nose, then sat back and waited. Riley picked it up slowly. It smelled sweet, almost like berries. Her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten anything but stale protein bars in days. Taking a leap of faith, she bit into it. Juice ran down her chin. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She ate the whole fruit in less than a minute. Over the next few days, a routine developed. The Valrax, who Riley started calling Ash because of his dark scales, would bring her food. Strange fruits, edible roots, even what looked like nuts from trees Riley couldn't identify. He led her to a clean water source, a spring that bubbled up from underground. He stood guard when she slept, his presence keeping away the other predators that prowled the forest. Riley talked to him constantly. At first, it was just to fill the silence, to keep herself from thinking about her parents, about being alone and stranded. But after a while, she realized Ash was listening. Really listening. His ears would pivot toward her when she spoke. His eyes followed her gestures. When she felt sad and her voice broke, he would move closer and rest his massive head near her. She started teaching him words. Simple ones at first. She'd point to herself and say Riley over and over. Then she'd point to him and say Ash. After 2 weeks, she swore he understood his name. His head would lift whenever she said it. She taught him food and water and danger. He seemed to absorb everything. And Ash taught her things too. Not with words, but with actions. He showed her which plants to avoid by knocking them aside with his tail. He demonstrated which creatures were threats by his body language, how his scales would rise and his stance would shift. He taught her how to move quietly through the forest, how to read the signs that meant danger was coming. One morning, Riley woke to find 3 smaller predators circling their camp. They looked like wolves made of knives, all teeth and lean muscle. They'd probably been tracking Riley for days, waiting for a chance. They saw her alone by the dead fire and started to close in. Riley grabbed a rock, knowing it wouldn't help much. Then Ash rose up from where he'd been sleeping in the shadows. The change in him was terrifying. The gentle creature who brought her fruit became something else entirely. He roared, and the sound echoed off every surface. His scales seemed to shimmer, making him look even bigger. He took 1 step toward the wolf creatures, and they scattered like leaves in a storm. Gone in seconds. Ash turned back to Riley, and just like that, he was gentle again. He walked over and did that thing he'd started doing, pressing his snout softly against her shoulder. Riley reached up and touched his face, careful of the healing wound where the thorn had been. "Thank you," she whispered. Ash made a sound, something between a purr and a rumble. Riley could have sworn he understood. 2 months after the crash, Riley heard a new sound in the sky. Engines. She ran to the open area of the canyon, Ash following close behind. A ship descended, Union markings on its hull. Rescue had finally come. Riley jumped and waved her arms, shouting. The ship landed, and armed personnel poured out. They took 1 look at Ash and raised their weapons. "No!" Riley screamed, throwing herself between Ash and the guns. "Don't shoot him. He saved me. He's my friend." The rescue team looked at her like she'd lost her mind. A human child, protecting a Valrax. The captain, a woman with hard eyes and graying hair, approached carefully. "Kid, that's a Valrax. Do you understand what that means?" Riley stood her ground. "His name is Ash. And I'm not going anywhere without him." The standoff lasted nearly an hour. Riley refused to budge, standing between Ash and a dozen armed soldiers who looked ready to shoot at any second. The captain, a stern woman named Victoria Chen, had seen a lot in her 30 years with the Union Rescue Corps, but never anything like this. A kid protecting the galaxy's most dangerous predator like it was a puppy. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Ash would be tranquilized for the trip, and both he and Riley would be transported together. Riley only agreed when they let her stay with Ash while he was sedated. She held his massive head in her lap during the entire flight to the nearest station, whispering to him that everything would be okay. She wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort him or herself. Station Liberty was a frontier outpost, the kind of place where rules were more like suggestions. When word spread that a rescue ship was bringing in a Valrax, half the station wanted it ejected into space immediately. The other half just wanted to see if the rumors were true. Could a human really bond with a creature like that? The station administrator, an old bureaucrat named Gerald Price, had a headache that wouldn't quit. There was no law covering this situation. Valrax were supposed to be avoided, not adopted. But the girl wouldn't leave the creature, and the creature wouldn't leave the girl. Security tried separating them once, and Ash nearly tore through a reinforced door. Riley screamed herself hoarse until they let her back in. Price made a decision that would be debated for years. Riley and Ash could stay together, but they'd be monitored constantly. Any sign of aggression from Ash, and the deal was off. Riley agreed immediately. She didn't care about being watched. She just needed her friend. 3 years passed. Riley grew from a traumatized 11-year-old into a somewhat less traumatized 14-year-old. Ash grew too, adding muscle and a few more scars. They became a fixture on Station Liberty, the strange pair that everyone talked about but few approached. Riley attended the station's academy, studying xenobiology like her mother had. Ash went everywhere with her, curled up outside classrooms, waiting patiently in corridors. Most students avoided them. The aliens especially gave them wide berths. Even other humans kept their distance. Who wanted to get close to someone who had a living weapon as a best friend? Riley told herself she didn't care, but the loneliness hurt more than she wanted to admit. At least she had Ash. He never judged her, never whispered behind her back, never looked at her like she was crazy. Then the pirates came. The Skrell were a species that made their living through violence. They'd been watching Station Liberty for months, noting its weak defenses, its valuable cargo bays, its position far from major Union patrols. They hit fast and hard, breaching the station's outer hull in 3 places simultaneously. Alarms screamed through every corridor. Riley was in the residential section when the attack started, heading back to her quarters after class. The first explosion knocked her off her feet. Emergency bulkheads started slamming down, trying to contain the breaches. Riley scrambled up, her ears ringing from the blast. Ash appeared at her side instantly, his scales raised in alarm. Through the chaos, Riley heard weapons fire and screaming. The pirates were already inside. Station security was overwhelmed within minutes. The Skrell had done this before, knew exactly how to disable defenses and drive toward the command center. Once they controlled that, they could lock down the entire station and take hostages. It was a clean, professional operation. They'd be gone with their loot before Union reinforcements could arrive. The lead pirate team, 5 heavily armed Skrell in combat armor, moved through the residential corridors systematically. They rounded a corner and stopped short. Standing in the middle of the hallway was a human girl, maybe 14 years old, and the biggest Valrax any of them had ever seen. The hallway behind Riley led directly to the residential evacuation pods where dozens of families were trying to escape. The lead Skrell, a veteran raider named Krell, actually laughed. He raised his plasma rifle casually. In his language, he said something his team understood as a joke about human stupidity. Then he fired. Ash moved faster than something his size should be able to move. One moment he was standing beside Riley, the next he was in front of her, scales deflecting the plasma bolt with a shower of sparks. The corridor suddenly seemed much smaller with an angry Valrax filling it. Krell stopped laughing. He'd seen Valrax before, but only from a safe distance through gun sights. Up close was different. Up close, you could see the intelligence in those golden eyes, the calculated violence in every movement. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a predator that had chosen its ground and wouldn't be moved. The pirates opened fire. Plasma bolts lit up the corridor like lightning. Ash took 3 hits that would have killed most creatures, but Valrax scales were designed by evolution to be nearly indestructible. One bolt got through though, scorching his shoulder, burning through scale to the flesh beneath. Ash roared in pain. And that's when Riley did something that made the pirates freeze in place. She didn't run. She didn't hide behind her predator friend. She ran forward, putting herself between Ash and the guns. In her hand was a maintenance torch she'd grabbed from an emergency kit, cranked up to maximum heat, and she was swinging it like a club while screaming words that would have gotten her detention. A human child. Protecting a Valrax. From them. The moment of shock cost them. Ash surged forward, and suddenly the narrow corridor became a nightmare. 3 pirates went down in the first 5 seconds. Krell managed to get his arm up to block, and lost the arm. The remaining pirate ran, broadcasting a panicked warning to the other teams that someone needed to avoid the residential section. Station security arrived 2 minutes later to find Riley sitting against the wall, hands shaking, trying to bandage Ash wound with torn pieces of her jacket. 3 pirates were dead. 2 were unconscious and would need serious medical attention. Krell was screaming about his arm. And Riley was crying into Ash's scales, telling him he was stupid for getting hurt. The security chief, a grizzled veteran named Rodriguez, approached carefully. He'd been ready to find bodies. Human bodies. Instead, he found a crime scene that looked like something from a horror movie, and a girl more worried about her friend than the fact that she just survived a pirate attack. That thing could have handled them alone, Rodriguez said, not unkindly. You didn't need to put yourself in danger. Riley looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, eyes blazing. He's not a thing. His name is Ash. And nobody hurts my friend. Nobody. The security footage went viral within hours. Every station, every ship, every outpost in the sector saw it. A human girl throwing herself in front of a wounded Valrax, screaming defiance at armed pirates. Ash, injured but unstoppable, protecting the one person who'd shown him kindness. The footage sparked debates, arguments, and discussions across 100 worlds. Some species said it proved humans were dangerously insane. Others said it showed something they'd always suspected about humans, that loyalty meant more to them than logic. A few, mostly other predator species, watched the footage with something like respect. The girl had courage. The Valrax had honor. Together, they were something new. Riley didn't care about any of that. She sat in the medical bay while a doctor treated Ash's wound, holding his massive head in her lap. The doctor, a nervous man named Klein, kept a safe distance while working. Ash tolerated the treatment only because Riley was there, talking to him softly. "You're an idiot," she told Ash, her voice thick. "Taking that hit for me. You could have been really hurt." Ash made that rumbling sound that Riley had learned meant he disagreed. In the 3 years together, they developed their own language. Riley couldn't speak his words, and Ash couldn't speak hers, but they understood each other perfectly. "I know," Riley said, reading his intention. "You'd do it again. Just like I'd step in front of those guns again." She pressed her forehead against his snout, careful of his healing nostril scar. "We're both idiots." Riley turned 17, and the galaxy still didn't know what to make of her. The pirate incident had made her famous in ways she hated. People recognized her on the station, pointed and whispered. Some called her brave. Others called her the crazy girl with the monster. Riley ignored them all. She had bigger plans now. The Frontier Corps was always desperate for volunteers. They were the people who responded when Colony World sent distress calls, when stations faced emergencies too small for the military but too dangerous for local security. It wasn't glamorous work. The pay was terrible. The survival rate wasn't great. But they helped people, and that's what mattered to Riley. She applied on her 17th birthday. The recruiter, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Gomez, looked at Riley's application and then looked at Ash, who was curled up in the corner of the tiny office, taking up most of the available space. "You understand that thing can't come with you," Gomez said, already knowing what the answer would be. "Then I guess you don't want us," Riley replied, standing up to leave. Gomez sighed. She'd seen Riley's footage, read the reports, knew the story. Against her better judgment, she made a call to her commanding officer. 20 minutes later, Riley Hayes and Ash were the newest members of Frontier Corps, assigned to Captain Helen Torres's rapid response team. Torres was a veteran who'd seen everything twice. She ran her team with an iron fist and expected results, not excuses. When Riley and Ash reported for duty, Torres looked them over with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a live grenade. "I don't care if your pet is a Valrax or a hamster," Torres said bluntly. "On my team, you follow orders, you watch your teammates' backs, and you don't make me regret bringing you on. Clear?" "Crystal clear," Riley said. "And if that creature shows even a hint of turning on my people, I'll space both of you personally." "Also clear." Riley met her eyes. "He won't. But if anyone threatens him without cause, they'll answer to me first." Torres almost smiled. The kid had spine. "Fair enough. Your first assignment starts tomorrow. Get some rest." The assignment was Colony Redstone, a mining settlement on the edge of explored space. They'd been using old bioweapons as a power source, things left over from some forgotten war. Somebody had assured them the weapons were dormant, perfectly safe. Somebody had been catastrophically wrong. The distress call came in at 0300 hours. The bioweapons, called Scourge units, had activated and breached containment. They were swarming through the colony, converting everything organic into more of themselves. The colonists were evacuating to the spaceport, but someone needed to hold the facility long enough for the transports to load. Torres's team drew the assignment. The ship dropped them at the spaceport perimeter just before dawn. Riley could already see the Scourge in the distance, a writhing mass of twisted organic matter that moved with horrible purpose. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and more emerging from the mining facility every minute. "Our job is simple," Torres announced. "Hold this position for 6 hours while evacuation completes. After that, orbital strikes will sterilize the site. Anyone who wants to back out, now's the time." Nobody moved. Riley checked her rifle, a standard-issue plasma weapon that felt too light in her hands. Ash stood beside her, scales already raised, reading the threat in the air. The other team members, 5 hardened veterans, gave them both a wide berth. They'd heard the stories but never worked with the strange pair before. The Scourge hit the perimeter in a wave of claws and teeth and things that shouldn't exist. Riley's training took over. She fired in controlled bursts like Torres had taught her, targeting the larger units first. Ash was a blur of black scales and violence, his claws cutting through Scourge flesh like it was paper. The creatures tried to swarm him, but Valrax were apex predators for a reason. Nothing got close without being shredded. 2 hours in, Riley's rifle overheated. A Scourge unit, spider-like and fast, broke through the line straight at her. She barely had time to shout before Ash was there, crushing it under one massive foot. But 3 more came from the side. Riley drew her knife, knowing it wouldn't help much. One of the veterans, a man named Jackson, pulled her behind cover and handed her his backup weapon. "Watch your sectors," he yelled over the noise. "Your friend can't be everywhere at once." But Ash was trying. Riley watched him fight, saw how he positioned himself to cover not just her but the entire team. When a massive Scourge unit broke through on the left flank, Ash intercepted it before it could reach two pinned-down team members. He took hits that would have killed anything else, and kept fighting. 4 hours in, Torres called out that they were halfway there. Riley's arms ached from firing. Her armor was covered in Scourge blood that burned where it touched. Ash was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his scales cracked in places. But the evacuation ships were still loading. Families with children, elderly colonists who couldn't move fast, injured miners. They all needed more time. 5 hours in, disaster struck. A Scourge unit, bigger than any they'd seen, emerged from the mining facility. It stood 20 feet tall, covered in hardened plates, moving on 6 legs. The team's weapons barely scratched it. Torres made a decision. "Fall back to secondary position," she ordered. "We can't hold here." But Riley saw the problem. The secondary position was closer to the spaceport. If that thing breached, it could reach the evacuation ships in minutes. Hundreds of people would die. She looked at Ash, and somehow, they both understood what needed to happen. "Captain, permission to engage," Riley said. Torres looked at her like she was insane. "That thing will kill you both." "Maybe," Riley agreed. "But it won't get past us to those ships. We just need to slow it down. 15 minutes, that's all." Torres wanted to say no. Every leadership instinct screamed at her to protect her team members. But she also knew they were out of options. 15 minutes, she said finally. "Then you fall back whether it's dead or not." Riley and Ash advanced while the rest of the team retreated to better positions. The massive Scourge unit focused on them immediately, recognizing threats. It charged with surprising speed. Ash met it head-on, and the collision sounded like a building collapsing. The two creatures grappled, claws against armor plates, teeth seeking vulnerable spots. Riley circled, looking for an opening. The thing's armor was too thick for her rifle. But armor had joints, weak points where plates connected. She saw one on the creature's lower back, a gap where two sections met. It meant getting close. Very close. Possibly suicidally close. She ran in while Ash had the thing's attention, slid under its massive body, and jammed her rifle into the gap. She fired on full auto until the weapon died. The Scourge unit screamed, thrashing. One leg caught Riley and sent her flying. She hit the ground hard, tasted blood, couldn't breathe. Through blurry vision, she saw Ash doing something incredible. He'd gotten his jaws around the thing's throat, right where Riley's shots had weakened the internal structure. Ash bit down with all the force a Valrax could generate, and something inside the creature gave way. It collapsed, twitching, dying. Ash limped over to where Riley was struggling to stand. He lowered his head, and Riley grabbed onto his scales, using him to pull herself up. Her ribs were definitely broken. Ash was bleeding from everywhere. But they were alive, and the path to the spaceport was clear. "Time's up," Torres's voice crackled over the comm. "Evac complete. Get to the extraction point, now." Riley and Ash stumbled toward the landing zone where the team's ship waited. Behind them, the Scourge were regrouping, starting to follow. They made it aboard with seconds to spare. As the ship lifted off, Riley watched through the viewport as orbital strikes turned the colony into glass. Thousands of Scourge units died in an instant. Torres stood over Riley while the medic wrapped her ribs. "You held for 9 hours, she said. "I asked for 6. You gave me 9. Couldn't let those people down," Riley managed through the pain. Torres looked at Ash, who was being treated by a very nervous veterinary specialist. "I was wrong about you too. You're not a liability. You're the best asset this team has." She paused. "But if you ever pull a stunt like that again without better backup, I'll kill you myself. Understood?" Riley smiled despite the pain. "Understood, Captain." Word of Redstone spread fast. The team that held impossible odds. The girl and her Valrax who'd bought time with their own blood. 3 years passed in a blur of emergency calls and impossible missions. Riley turned 20, and Ash gained silver streaks through his black scales. They'd saved more lives than Riley could count. Hostage situations where Ash's presence made criminals reconsider their choices. Rescue operations where Riley's small size let her reach places others couldn't. Disasters where they worked together like two parts of the same whole. Captain Torres's team became legendary in Frontier Corps. And at the center of every story was the same pair. The Dragon Girl, some called Riley. Others called Ash the Tamed Terror, though anyone who knew them understood he'd never been tamed. He'd chosen. There was a difference. Then the Hive Collective arrived, and everything changed. They came from beyond mapped space, a species unlike anything the Union had encountered. The Collective weren't individuals. They were a networked consciousness, billions of minds thinking as one. Their ships blotted out stars. Their armies moved with perfect coordination. They didn't negotiate, didn't communicate, just consumed everything in their path. The Union mobilized every available force. Military fleets engaged the Collective in massive space battles. Ground forces tried to hold colony worlds. But the Collective had numbers and perfect tactics. They'd clearly been planning this invasion for years. Within months, the Union was losing badly. Frontier Corps wasn't designed for warfare. But when regular forces got overwhelmed, someone had to step up. Torres's team volunteered for the most dangerous assignment available. Boarding actions against Hive ships. Someone needed to get inside those vessels and disable them from within. It was suicide work. Most boarding teams didn't come back. Riley was checking her gear when Torres pulled her aside. The captain looked older than her years, worn down by too many losses. "You don't have to do this," Torres said quietly. "You and Ash. You've done enough. Nobody would blame you for sitting this one out." Riley finished loading her rifle. "Those things are consuming colony worlds, Captain. Worlds with families, kids, people who just want to live their lives. Someone has to stop them." She looked at where Ash was resting, his scales showing the scars of 100 battles. "Besides, we're pretty good at impossible situations." Torres almost smiled. "That you are. That you are." The assault on Hive Command Ship Theta 9 began at 0600 hours. 3 boarding teams hit different sections simultaneously. Riley's team drew the deepest insertion point, closest to what intelligence believed was the ship's central processing core. If they could destroy that, the entire ship would go dead in space. The inside of a Hive ship was nightmare architecture. Walls that seemed to breathe. Corridors that shifted and changed. And everywhere, Hive drones, waiting to defend their vessel. The drones weren't individual creatures. They were extensions of the collective mind, moving with perfect coordination, attacking from every angle at once. Riley's team fought through corridor after corridor. The drones adapted to every tactic, learning and countering in real time. Jackson went down first, overwhelmed by a swarm that appeared from a hidden passage. Then Rodriguez took a hit protecting Torres. The team was being whittled away. Ash was everywhere at once, his size a disadvantage in the tight corridors but his ferocity unmatched. The drones tried to swarm him repeatedly. He'd throw them off, only to face another wave. Riley fought at his side, rifle blazing, covering his blind spots while he protected her from attacks she couldn't see coming. They reached the core chamber after 2 hours of brutal fighting. Torres, Riley, and Ash were all that remained of the team. The chamber was massive, filled with pulsing biological machinery that hurt to look at. At the center was the processing node, a structure of twisted organic matter that coordinated the entire ship. Torres began setting charges while Riley and Ash held the entrance. Drones poured through in waves, drawn by the threat to their ship's heart. Riley's rifle overheated. She switched to her backup, fired until that died too, then drew her knife. Ash stood over her like a living shield, taking hits that burned through his scales. Then Torres made a discovery that changed everything. "The chamber's sealed," she shouted over the chaos. "Once we blow the charges, the exit locks. Someone has to stay behind to trigger them manually." Riley understood immediately what that meant. Someone wasn't getting out. She looked at Torres, who'd led them through 3 years of impossible missions. She looked at Ash, who'd been her companion for 9 years, since she was a scared kid on a death world. "I'll do it," Riley said. "Like hell," Torres replied. "You've got your whole life ahead of you. I'm old and tired. This is how I go out." But Ash had different ideas. He grabbed Riley in his jaws, gently but firmly, the way he'd done once before on another mission. Riley shouted in protest, but Ash wasn't listening. He carried her toward the exit, moving with purpose. Torres saw what he was planning. "No," Torres said, understanding. "You stubborn, brave, stupid creature." Ash set Riley down outside the chamber. He looked at her with those golden eyes that had seen her grow from child to woman. Riley was screaming, trying to get past him, but he blocked her path. Then he turned and went back into the chamber, the door beginning to close behind him. "Ash, no." Riley threw herself at the closing door, but Torres caught her, held her back with surprising strength. Inside the chamber, Ash positioned himself by the manual trigger. Torres backed toward the exit, keeping her rifle trained on the entrance as more drones arrived. "You better survive this, you hear me?" she told Ash. "That girl needs you." Ash made that rumbling sound that meant he understood. He waited until Torres was clear, until the door was almost sealed. Then he triggered the charges. The explosion tore through the ship's core. Riley felt it through the walls, saw the lights flicker and die. Torres dragged her toward the extraction point as the ship began to tear itself apart. Riley fought every step, crying, screaming Ash's name. They made it to the boarding craft with seconds to spare. As they launched away from the dying hive ship, Riley stared at the viewscreen, watching the vessel break apart. Ash was in there somewhere, in that hell of fire and collapsing metal. The toughest creature she'd ever known, gone because he'd chosen to save her one last time. The medic tried to sedate Riley. She refused. She sat in the crew bay, staring at nothing, feeling hollow. Torres sat beside her, silent. There was nothing to say. They'd completed the mission. The hive ship was destroyed. But the cost felt too high. They made it back to the fleet carrier where surviving boarding teams were being processed. Riley moved like a ghost, following Torres through debriefing, through medical checks, barely aware of anything. She kept expecting to hear that familiar rumble, to feel Ash's presence beside her. Nothing but emptiness. 3 days passed. The Union forces pushed the collective back, capitalizing on the loss of command ship Theta 9. More boarding actions succeeded. The tide of war was turning. Riley didn't care. She sat in her assigned quarters, staring at the wall, not eating, barely sleeping. Torres visited every day. She'd sit quietly, sometimes talking about the mission, sometimes just being there. On the 4th day, she brought news. They're sending recovery teams to salvage what they can from Theta 9. Looking for tech, bodies of our people. Anything useful. Riley looked up for the first time. His body. I want his body. He deserves a proper memorial. Torres nodded. I'll make it happen. The recovery team returned 6 days after the mission. Riley was on the hangar deck when they landed, heart heavy, dreading what they'd bring back. The cargo bay doors opened. Men and women in hazard suits emerged, carrying equipment, dragging salvage containers. Then Riley heard something that made her heart stop. A roar. Weak, pained, but unmistakable. She ran toward the ship, pushing past personnel, ignoring shouts to stop. In the back of the cargo bay, surrounded by medical equipment, was Ash. He was barely alive. His scales were burned and cracked. One leg looked broken. He was missing parts of his tail. But his golden eyes opened when Riley shouted his name. She fell to her knees beside him, hands hovering over his wounds, afraid to touch and cause more pain. "How?" she whispered. The recovery team leader, a gruff man named Peterson, stepped forward. Found him in a collapsed section of the core chamber. The explosion knocked him into a service shaft. The shaft's walls absorbed most of the blast. By the time we reached that section, we expected bodies. Found him instead, barely breathing, but alive. Valraks are hard to kill. Riley pressed her forehead against Ash's snout, the way she'd done 1,000 times. Tears ran down her face, but this time they were tears of relief. "You stubborn, brave, stupid creature," she said, echoing Torres's last words to him. Ash made that rumbling sound, weaker than usual but there. It meant he'd do it all again.